Happy Friday here on Locked On Blue Devils, taking one final look at the 2023-2024 season for Duke men's basketball, specifically the end-of-season reviews. We're talking about some big-time upperclassmen for the Blue Devils here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils.
Hi, everybody. Dick Vitale. Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with J.J. Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. So happy to have you here with us on Friday, May 24th, 2024. Locked On Blue Devils is a daily podcast devoted to everything going on in the life of Duke athletics. We've got Duke baseball currently in the ACC baseball tournament. You've got Duke softball getting set for a super regional weekend against the Missouri Tigers, but we're talking about this Duke men's basketball team. And yet again, we've got our pal Kevin Connelly back with us for the second consecutive day to do another end-of-season review. Today, we're going to be discussing the seasons that were for both Ryan Young and Jaylen Blakes, a couple of upperclassmen who meant a whole lot to this Duke basketball team. We'll talk about their futures and a couple of other fun wrinkles here on this episode of the program. Very excited to have you here with us once again. Please make sure that you follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Also, make sure you check us out on X at LO_Blue Devils. I'm there as well at _JJ_Jackson_. Like the video on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and go ahead and share these videos with your friends in the comment section down below. Let me know if you're an everydayer so I can give you some much-deserved shout-outs and all of those fun things. So, without further ado, let's bring him on in once again for the second straight day. Kevin Connelly's back with us. We had so much fun yesterday, Kevin. We had to run it back again here today, man.
Always happy to be here, JJ. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to get into some of the end-of-season reviews for the Duke basketball team, and we'll start today with a conversation around Ryan Young, a big part of the Duke basketball team, a captain for this team. And when you look at the year that was for him in particular, like we've done with the start of every conversation this week, I want to go back to how we were feeling about these players a year ago at this time. And we were talking about Ryan Young using that COVID year of eligibility and just the experience that he was going to bring to a Duke basketball team. Because remember, folks, Derek Lively II had just declared for the NBA draft. Duke is trying to bring in the likes of Caden Shedrick or Ernest Uday or some of these other kind of big-time shot-blocking bigs, but it's Ryan Young who is returning for the Duke basketball team and ultimately has a pretty big role that he took on defensively for this team and that sort of thing. So when you think back to this time a year ago, what do you recall about where Ryan Young was fitting into the equation?
Well, it felt like with every day, his role was getting bigger and more important going into this last season because the biggest question mark for Duke was center. And you just mentioned that, they're trying to get a couple of guys in the transfer portal. It doesn't work out. And then the realization is here that Kyle Filipowski is going to be this team's starting center, and there's no one really behind him. There's question marks. With Christian Reeves, can he take the next step forward and be like that shot blocking guy that comes off the bench at just over 7 foot? And you knew what you were going to get with Ryan Young. He was going to be a guy that went in there, worked hard, did everything he could to rebound, but obviously there were physical limitations. And he would try to overcome that as best as he could. And he became this leader, and guys gravitated to him. You saw it over the summer with the Brotherhood podcast that he was hosting. But yeah, I think that's where people really were in the offseason on Ryan Young. It was like, okay, I don't know how confident I can be that this guy is going to be the backup center to Kyle Filipowski. Now, yes, you'd assume Filipowski is going to play a lot of minutes, but I think people were a little bit nervous and uneasy how the Duke center position was shaping up last offseason.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Brotherhood podcast because that's so big, and it was a good indicator of just the type of personality he had. I can recall ACC tournament and NCAA tournament settings, his first season playing for the Duke Blue Devils. The Duke men's basketball social staff gave Ryan the microphone and let him go into the locker room and interview his teammates. We saw that again this year, and you really got a sense of the personality that he had. They're able to build that off into a podcast. So you get to see more of that personality. You get to see him as a leader and someone that these freshmen would ultimately be very comfortable around, kind of pushing the guys that were making those big decisions to return for their sophomore season, and earns the right to be named a captain. I mean, 1 year after transferring from another Division I program, playing on the floor for Duke, and ultimately his play spoke for itself because he's named a captain.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, more than just his play, but it was also like that leadership that he brought off the court was the reason why he was a captain. And then you look on the floor, and like I said, I mean, he always gave it his all every time he was out there. Some games were better than others. Some matchups were better than others, like I mentioned, because of the physical limitations. But you look back, the people on YouTube that are watching, that top left picture was in the Garden against Baylor. And when Kyle Filipowski was in foul trouble and it looked like Duke was dead in the water, Ryan Young came in after not playing his best minutes earlier in that game, and he came in and provided a spark and really helped lead Duke to a big-time win at that point in their season on a neutral floor over Baylor. So I think there will be moments that people look back on Ryan Young and say, yeah, that was a really good contribution he made to this team. And I think he's a little bit different in that, like, a lot of teams off the bench want that big, physical, imposing center who's going to bump around the opposition. And yes, he's going to pick up a lot of fouls, but he's also going to block a lot of shots. I think Ryan Young's an old school throwback center, and they said it a lot on the broadcast. He has that old man YMCA type game, and he's going to be giving guys buckets in 15 years down the line when he's playing at the local YMCA. But it feels like he'll always have a home at Duke. Obviously now a graduate transfer, or it was a graduate student transfer and now has graduated from the Duke Business School. And he'll begin his life now away from basketball and in the real world. And I would imagine with that Duke graduate business degree, he's going to move on to a lot of big things in the world, in the business world. And he's certainly going to make a lot of people at Duke proud.
And hey, Kevin, we could circle it back to the Brotherhood podcast one more time, because even in the past few weeks since the season has ended, he's hosted a show. He hasn't even run away from that spot. We really haven't seen much content put out there from Duke that he wasn't a part of in that regard. We're talking about some of the bigger games that he had. You mentioned that game against Baylor in Madison Square Garden. How about his effort in the game against Houston as well? A really grit and grind type game where Duke wins a low-scoring affair, 54-51, 23 minutes in that one for Ryan Young. Finished with 4 points and 4 rebounds, but really was just giving it his all. And that was one of the better moments in games, I think, that we saw from him this season, was that Sweet 16 matchup.
Yeah, and you said it, giving his all. He was always a player you were never going to have to question if he was going to show up to the arena with his energy and his hustle. He was going to have it every single night and every single second he was on that floor. And I think that's going to go a long way in the eyes of Duke fans. No, he's not going to be remembered as one of the Duke greats. But when you look back and you're looking at rosters and you're talking about teams, Ryan Young, he wasn't always a guy that was going to give you 10 points and 10 rebounds every single night, but he was going to give you every ounce of energy he had in his body every time he was out there on the floor.
You look back at his season, 36 games played, meaning Ryan Young participated in every single game that Duke had this season, averaging 11.8 minutes per game. Although I'm able to look through the individual numbers and we can highlight the home game against Wake Forest, where he only plays 2 minutes in that one, or a game against Louisville where Young is only out there for 3 minutes. Conversely, you've got the game against Houston in the Sweet 16 when he's out there for 23 minutes. He played a season-high 24 minutes against Michigan State in the Champions Classic. It felt like more times than not, the numbers did kind of average out to that 10, 11, 12 minutes per game that you were getting, kind of 4-minute bursts, 1 or 2 a half for Ryan Young while he was out there. But, I mean, man, he was very, very active. Sometimes the stats weren't necessarily there, but you could tell he was being aggressive on the defensive end of the floor and giving it his all every time he was out.
Yeah, and sometimes his job was literally to go out there for 2 minutes or so and just give Kyle Filipowski a rest on the bench, whether it be right around immediate timeout, just to give him a little bit extra breather because you knew he was going to come back out there, and he was a player that Duke desperately needed on the floor. And then even with Mark Mitchell's struggles throughout the season, especially late in the year, we saw some lineups with Kyle Filipowski and Ryan Young both out there, especially in the NCAA tournament. And I think those lineups were pretty effective as well, although you do have some spacing issues with those two on the floor. So I think all in all, people will look back on a positive season and a positive Duke career for Ryan Young.
Free throws could be troublesome for everybody. Last thing I want to highlight here, 62.9% from the free throw line. I can remember a couple of misses that felt like they were big in the moment and that sort of thing. But all in all, again, that YMCA type game from Ryan Young. I just wish some 3-point play opportunities, maybe one or two of them more, would have been converted had he been able to kind of knock down that free throw that he got afterwards.
Yeah, that would be nice. And always you want to add another point up on the board. But for a center shooting about 63% from the free throw line, I think more often than not, you're probably going to take that.
All right, well, we got to take our next break here on the program today. When we come back, we want to talk a little bit more about Jaylen Blakes and the season that he had for the Duke Blue Devils. Kevin Connelly joins us on the program today, and we're back here in just a moment. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It is winner-take-all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, those new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook and a very proud partner of Locked On Blue Devils. Keep this thing rolling here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. JJ Jackson joined today by my good friend Kevin Connelly, the site expert from Ball Durham. Kevin, if you will, tell us a little bit about balldurham.com and the work you have.
We got everything on Duke Athletics over at Ball Durham. You mentioned baseball and softball. Softball in the NCAA tournament, baseball gearing up for the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, lacrosse season comes to an end a little bit early, and then obviously we got everything you could possibly want on Duke basketball, players in the NBA playoffs, roster movement, recruiting, and obviously starting to look ahead now towards next season. So you could read us all over at balldurham.com. Follow us on social media at ball_Durham.
All right, so let's talk about Jaylen Blakes and the year that he had for the Duke basketball team. Jaylen Blakes will go down as one of two people to ever play for head coach Mike Krzyzewski and head coach John Shire at Duke. He and Jeremy Roach have that fine distinction. Blake's a part of that 2022 Final Four team as a true freshman, although he did not contribute much on the floor. This time a year ago, as we think about the role that he was going to have, when we've already talked a lot this week about the four guards Duke featured this season with Jeremy Roach, Jared McCain, Tyrese Proctor, and Caleb Foster. Last season, when you're kind of projecting junior season Jaylen Blakes, what do you think you were expecting going into the year, Kevin? What do you remember our chats even being about his play going into the season?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't expecting much, and not to say we didn't get much, but I think we got what I kind of expected. You give him credit, though, because Jaylen Blakes, a player that felt like easily could have entered the transfer portal in any one of his off seasons at Duke, but he put in the work in the classroom, graduating in 3 years, getting that Duke undergraduate degree, and then jumping in the transfer portal. And I guess he'll still have 2 years of eligibility remaining at his next stop, which he hasn't announced yet. So going into this upcoming season, it was like it was going to be tough to find minutes for him, and it was. But it was when he was on the floor, you knew he was going to be a defense guy first. He wasn't going to have much offense, as it was shown throughout the season. And he was going to be tough. He wasn't going to back down to anybody. He was going to stick his nose in there. He was going to be the first one on the floor. And you were just wondering if he was going to be able to have himself enough minutes to create a role for him. And as things typically go in a college basketball season. There's more minutes to be had in November and December and January than February, March, and April. And I think Jaylen Blakes learned that, and I think he knew that. Because as the season gets later, rotations start to get tighter, guys get more minutes, and you want your best players out there on the floor as much as possible. And that's kind of what you saw rolling around into March, into February, when you see Jaylen Blakes has only played 31 games, not getting out on the floor as often in some of those games. And if he did, they were blowouts late in mop-up duty. So what we got from Jaylen Blakes this year, I think, was a lot what people were expecting last offseason from him.
Yeah, you think about last offseason, I think we had a little bit more of a conversation in terms of, okay, well, we had, the Wake Forest game. We had a couple of 17-point efforts from him in his sophomore season. Maybe that's something. Maybe another year kind of developing and getting to go up against the Duke guards that were already on the roster, a new set of talented freshmen coming in. Maybe he's set to turn a corner on an offensive end and be more of a big, impactful type player. But I think in a lot of ways, we mentioned 9.2 minutes per game. It kind of just came down to the minutes, Kevin, and there are only so many of them to go around. And when you're looking at Jaylen Blakes versus the other guards, they're just a little bit ahead of him and kind of not worthy of giving more of those minutes to Jaylen Blakes, as tough as that is to say. Because, again, I do want to recognize chats we had last season when we were highlighting and recognizing some of those 17-point performances that Blakes had as a sophomore.
Yeah, you look at that, and it was like the heater that he had, that he was Duke's best offensive player for a couple of games during his sophomore season. I think, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but, yesterday we talked about Tyrese Proctor's injuries with the ankle sprain and the concussion. Obviously, Caleb Foster, we talked about his injury with the ankle injury late in the season against Wake Forest. And I think maybe people thought that was going to open the door a little bit more for Jaylen Blakes to get more time, and did it maybe a minute here, a minute there. But when, like I said, when you get late in the season, you're just going to keep rolling with your two-headed backcourt in Jeremy Roach then and Jared McCain if Proctor and Foster weren't on the floor. And then we saw some more minutes from Sean Stewart, and it felt like Sean Stewart was the beneficiary more of Caleb Foster's minutes than Jaylen Blakes was, to get a little bit more athletic and to get a little bit more bigger out on the floor. So, I think Jaylen Blakes found himself in a tough spot, but I think he'll probably transfer down towards a mid-major, and I think that could be really good for him, because I could see him being a lead guard at a mid-major. I think we talked about it. You mentioned Davidson was in the mix for him. Really, I feel like his recruitment has been quiet since he graduated Duke now last weekend. So maybe things will start to pick up for him, and also be able to take more visits and visit programs, although a lot of rosters are starting to fill out. So hopefully he finds a good landing spot, gets I think he will have 2 more years left, definitely one. And hopefully he's able to have a successful finish to his college basketball career.
No doubt about that. 1.8 points per game for Jaylen Blakes. Again, this season was a big drop from his sophomore year, where he had 3.4 points per game in a couple of those 17-point outings. His season high this year was 15 points against Charlotte. Did have 10 points in the opener against Dartmouth, but more times than not, it's a bucket or two in these games when Jaylen Blakes was getting in, and sometimes it really was only for 45 seconds or so at the end of the game, kind of in those mop-up duty roles. So before our final break of the show here, Kevin, we talk about, the tenacious effort that Blakes would give on the defensive end of the floor. If you were to give him kind of that defensive report card, how does he fare?
I think he fares really well. I think similar to what I said yesterday, I think it's in that B+. Probably, I think you'd even give him the A range. I think you look back at the NCAA tournament victory against Vermont, where, my goodness, I think it was late in the second half, he takes that nasty spill.
I was just about to say that. Yep.
Yeah, and it looks like his season is over as he goes back to the locker room, and then in typical Jaylen Blakes fashion, he comes running out of the locker room, didn't re-enter the game, but sits on the bench, and then misses no time. He's ready to play a couple of days later in the Sweet 16 against a Houston team, and then obviously he plays in against NC State in the Elite Eight as well. So I think that encapsulates Jaylen Blakes' career at Duke, that toughness. He loved being a Duke Blue Devil. He loved representing this program. and he really gave it his all every time he was on the floor as well. Very similar to what we talked about a little earlier with Ryan Young. So his defense, he was a guy that was known for his defense. So I'm going to give him an A in that defensive category.
Yeah, the photos that are out there of Jaylen Blakes midair in the tumble from that NCAA tournament game, it's wild to say. That'll probably be a lasting image that I have for the guy. One, it's just you never see those type of falls in games like this. But then two, not as many kind of big-time plays that Blakes was able to make over the course of the season. I will say, tip of the cap, 16 of 17 from the free throw line this season, 94% from the charity stripe. And let's give him some respect too, Kevin, because when Blakes would drive, more times than not, he'd surprise us and even the other team by going up and finishing with the hammer and slamming it home rather than just some easy layup. Like he'd flushed one or two.
Yeah, he wasn't the biggest in stature, listed on the roster only at 6'2", but he was sneaky athletic. He had some bounce in his step. And he could rise up and finish with some of the best of them, even though he was a little bit on the smaller side.
All right, let's take one more break, and then we'll start to wrap up our conversation here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Kevin Connelly joining me here today. Locked On Blue Devils is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Of course, it's playoff time right now, and Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually goes down the closer that it gets to tip-off. We've already had 2 games played in Boston for the Eastern Conference Finals between the Celtics and Pacers. Go to Gametime right now to see what those tickets are going to look like in Indy to see that playoff game. Also, the series going on between Dallas and Minnesota in the Western Conference Finals. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guaranteed. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I absolutely love the panoramic view from your seat that you can get in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime is going to credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's start to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. JJ Jackson, joined by Kevin Connelly from Durham. We're talking today about the seasons that Jaylen Blakes and Ryan Young had for the Duke Blue Devils. Ryan Young is out of NCAA eligibility. Kevin, as you mentioned a little bit ago, at the time that you and I are chatting here, Jaylen Blakes has not made any type of decision as to where he will play basketball next season, but gets his degree from Duke in 3 years and now gets the opportunity to play basketball elsewhere. Just your thoughts on kind of the futures for both of these players that we've been discussing today.
Well, yeah, like we mentioned, Ryan Young goes into the business world now. His basketball career ends. He really didn't have a professional option laid out to him. As for Jaylen Blakes, obviously there's still more basketball to be played in his college career. Will it result in professional opportunities? Probably not, but you never know what could happen if he thrives at his next destination. So certainly 2 guys that love putting the Duke uniform on every single night. And like we said, they're not going to be remembered as some of the best players to ever come through Duke, but certainly with the dedication and all those diehard Duke fans, they'll certainly look back fondly on the years of Ryan Young and Jaylen Blakes in Durham.
All right, so let's take a look at this season for Duke moving forward like we've done throughout the week when we do these end-of-season reviews. And in some ways, Kevin, I'm putting you on the spot, and I hate to do this to you, but just for the sake of conversation, and I would love to have people chime in their thoughts as well in the comment section below. You look at the 2024-2025 roster, if you were to sort of identify the Ryan Young or Jaylen Blakes of this year's team, and I'm not talking play style, just more so the minutes, the time restrictions that they might have out there on the floor, the efforts and contributions that they will most definitely have in practice settings. Who do you think those guys are?
Oh, for Ryan Young, I'm going to go Patton Ngamba, the freshman. I think production
Great
wise, yeah,
choice.
very
Yeah.
similar. I think he's a guy that is going to give you everything he possibly has every time he's on the floor. And I think also you look at how much time is he going to get. Kaman Malawak's going to take a lot of the minutes at center. You look at the transfer and Malik Brown from Syracuse. How much time is he going to play at the 5? Is he going to play more 4? But then you have Cooper Flagg there who could play some 4, some 3. He can handle the ball 2. Will he play some 1? So I'm going to go with Big Pat, as they call him, for that Ryan Young replacement. For Jaylen Blakes, I think it's interesting. So you have somebody who averaged just about 9 minutes per game, didn't play very much. I think a lot of people would probably turn to like a Cameron Sheffield, the transfer from Rice. But I don't see him playing that many minutes per game. You look at some of the freshmen, Con Kneppel, Aaron Harris, more offensively gifted than Jaylen Blakes. How many minutes could they possibly get? Could they be someone to get around 9 minutes per game throughout the season between them? Sion James, could it be him that fills the Jaylen Blakes type role? Because obviously the backcourt is crowded. But when you look at Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster, at least in my mind, I see him being on the higher end of that 9 minutes per game. So I know we didn't give you an answer really there for Jaylen Blakes, but those are some of the players that were running through my mind when you first asked that question. I think I'm going to land on Sion James, though.
Okay. I would probably
will.
I would probably go more Cameron Sheffield, just from
Okay.
the fact of, to your point, not looking at stats or anything on the floor, but experience and effort that you're going to get in practice alone, right? Like Jaylen Blakes did way more for this team in practice working with those guards than really he did out there on the floor. And you and I both are very excited about the Sion James addition to this Duke basketball team. I think the impact's going to be felt in games for this upcoming season. So I don't want to answer it for you, Kevin, but just looking at the experience that Blake's had on last year's roster as one of the older voices in the locker room. Cameron Sheffield's been around for 4 years. He's got 2 years left, but he's already done 4 years of this. Very experienced, and I think he's going to bring a lot to that Duke team in the locker room and on the practice court.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, especially with what he's going to do in practice. So I think that is a really good comparison in trying to fill the role of Jaylen Blakes with Cameron Sheffield.
Well, Kevin, this has been a whole lot of fun talking about the players from this past season. Now we really get to kind of turn our attention to the upcoming year ahead. As always, really do appreciate the time. Before we let you go, one more time, please plug everything that you got going on at Ball Durham.
So you could read us every day over at balldurham.com, and then you follow us on social media, ball_Durham. Really appreciate it with all your listeners coming over and giving us a follow and giving us a read every single day.
Love it. Kevin, thanks for the time. We'll do it again soon, okay?
Thanks, JJ.
That's Kevin Connelly. He is the site expert from Ball Durham, and he joins us on the show today. Follow him on X at Kevin Connelly24. 2 straight days to end the week here with our buddy Kevin. Really do appreciate all of that. Again, please leave us a 5-star rating and written review on the Apple Podcast platform, and watch the show each and every day on YouTube. That'll do it for our show. As always, go Duke! I'll talk to you soon. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.